That was, of course, Chris Bowen, the shadow treasurer there, and he says this is a missed opportunity and it's a political document. Well, let's look at some of the figures in this document. The report sets out the effect of the budget under three scenarios, previous policies being the first, that is code for Labor, really, currently legislated, so that's what the government had been able to get through the Parliament, and proposed policies, that's what the government wants to get through the Parliament. Well, under the previous policies, the report predicts a budget deficit of more than $530 billion by 2055 and net debt of more than $5 trillion. Under the currently legislated scenario, the budget deficit by 2055 has halved to around $260 billion and debt is down to around $2.5 trillion. Under the final scenario, the report says the budget would be back in sustainable surplus by 2019 and debt would be paid off by 2031. Well, now here in the studio I'm joined by the Finance Minister, Chris Uhlmann. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Well, that scenario that you wanted by 2031 is now not going to happen. Clearly, is it?
Well, what it shows is that we have made a lot of progress and that we've still got a lot of work to be done. And we're obviously entirely open and transparent about this. What the intergenerational report shows are the challenges and the opportunities we face as a nation over the next few decades and what we need to do in order to prepare ourselves.
Just to put it in perspective, under the currently legislated plan, which is the middle one we were just looking at there would be budget deficits for the next 40 years, even if we had 40 years of uninterrupted growth.
That is exactly right. Under the scenario that we inherited from our predecessors, that we would have 40 years of deficits heading for a massive deficit of 12% as a share of GDP by 2054-55. We've been able to halve that as a result of what we have legislated so far. And if all of our measures in the budget had been implemented or were to be implemented, we would have surpluses all the way through from 2019-20 onwards, all the way to 2054-55. So what it shows is that in last year's budget we essentially tried to give effect to structural reforms to put the budget in a strong and sustainable position for the next 4 decades. And clearly, with the benefit of hindsight, we perhaps were a bit too ambitious in
perhaps
one budget.
You were, because Joe Hockey said you bit off too much. You just said at the press conference.
The Prime Minister, the Treasurer, myself, we've all said that in different ways over the last week or two. And indeed, I mean, we have clearly acknowledged that that has been an issue last year.
Yeah, that's the measure of the savings that you're going to have to try and find, isn't it?
Well, we've got some more work to do, that's right. And but what we also understand is that perhaps sometimes going a bit more slowly helps you go faster. Perhaps making sure that the Australian people have a better appreciation of the full context and the reasons why we need to make some of the more difficult, or we would say necessary decisions, helps get some of these structural reform proposals through. And then, of course, we can do better in terms of making sure we get their design into the best possible shape.
You've lost so much political capital on the way through. How do you now start a conversation with the Australian people that they're prepared to listen to?
Well, we're focused on putting Australia on the strongest possible foundation for the future. We're focused on strengthening economic growth, creating more jobs and making sure that government help for families is sustainable and affordable over the next 4 decades and beyond. And, obviously, I mean, we're putting it all on the table. People will ultimately form their own judgments. But what we are very keen to do is to engage in the conversation about the challenges that we're facing as a nation, the structural economic challenges that come with the ageing of the population, as well as the opportunities, and the challenges that we're facing in the context of our exposure to global economic conditions. And then prepare ourselves in the best possible way so that we are as resilient as possible to deal with challenges in the best possible position to take advantage of the opportunities.
All right, let's look at some of those challenges. Obviously, one of the biggest, or in fact the biggest budget item that you need to look at is pensions. Over time they grow to an ever larger part of the budget. It's already the biggest part of the budget at the moment. You have to get changes through to the pension age, don't you?
If you look at what happens as a result of the ageing of the population, right now we've got 4.5 Australian of the traditional working age between 15 and 64 that are looking after Australians over 65, and that is going to go down to about 2.7 Australians for every every Australian over 65. So clearly there is an implication there in terms of workforce participation, in terms of the pressure on our tax base and the like. And so really what we do need to do in order to keep up economic growth, we need to lift workforce participation by convincing more older Australians to work for longer.
And the pension age has to shift up.
Clearly, I mean, the previous government, the previous Labor government, increased the pension age over a period to 67. We kept the same trajectory and proposed to increase it to 70 years of age. Incidentally, when Labor increased the pension age, we supported it. When we are proposing to increase the pension age gradually to 2035, so still 20 years away, the Labor Party takes a political position and opposes it.
Now, Ian Yates from the Council of the Ageing did praise some parts of this, but he said the glaring omission in it is superannuation and concessions to high income earners. Don't you need to look at that when you're looking at the retirement age in its totality?
Well, again, I mean, the intergenerational report is not a report of policy prescriptions. It is essentially laying out the challenges and opportunities we have in front of us as a nation. And of course, the conversation will now take place, and it will no doubt shape some of the policy discussions and some of the discussions about ideas on the best way forward. Now, when it comes to tax arrangements on superannuation, we made some commitments in the lead up to the last election about what we would do in the first term of government, that we wouldn't make any adverse, unexpected changes to superannuation policy settings, but we also said that we would have a conversation through the tax white paper review process over about medium to long-term tax policy settings. And in that context, I'm sure that there would be a very wide-ranging conversation on how we can improve our tax policy settings to put ourselves on the best possible trajectory for the future.
And I guess a question about that too is that one of the reasons that people got concessions in superannuation, it's forced savings by the government. If I'm a high income earner, I might say, well, don't force me to save and I'll invest my money how I like.
Well, the key really is how do we ensure, as the proportion of working Australians for people in retirement continues to fall, how do we ensure that more and more Australians are able to look after their own requirements in retirement? And there will be an ongoing conversation. It's not something that we'll be able to resolve here today, but I'm sure, I mean, this provides the context for the conversation we need to have about adjustments to policy over the years ahead.
Looking at one of the other Ps, productivity. Now, in the 1990s, it was 2.2%. You're setting it at 1.5 over the long term. Do you think they will ever get back to that 2.2% too? Because apart from the structural changes that were made in the economy, we also saw the rise of the personal computer and things like that. There was a huge boost in productivity.
Well, I mean, from where we sit today, we don't know what we don't know. And who knows? I mean, there might be further technological explosions and massive innovation that will have significant positive disruptive effects. But from where we sit right now, I mean, 1.5, we've put it transparently on the table as being the assumption that we're working on. And obviously, if we can do better, we should. And if there is technological advance that helps us improve productivity by more, that even the better. That's fantastic. But we think that we need to be open and transparent about what our current working assumptions are.
And among your working assumptions is at some stage workplace relations have to become a little bit looser, don't they? Workplace laws.
Again, I mean, we had certain policies that we took to the last election. We're acting consistently with what we said before the last election, implementing the policies we took to the last election. But of course, there will be a conversation about our second-term agenda between now and the next election, and no doubt that'll go across a whole range of policy areas, including tax, including the governance arrangements in the federation, including workplace relations arrangements, and we'll be announcing our policies for a second term as we approach the next election.
And finally, how would you sell this budget? What's the top line? This intergenerational report for you. What's the top line? What are you trying to tell the Australian people?
We are a great country, and we are facing a series of challenges, and we have a number of opportunities, and we need to get ourselves into the strongest possible position to be as resilient as possible in the face of global economic headwinds that will continue to come our way, and into the strongest possible position to take advantage of the opportunities we have, being part of the Asia Pacific, where most of the world's economic growth will be generated over the next few decades. We have made a lot of progress in recent times, but there is much more work to be done, and we're all in this together.
Chris Uhlmann, thank you.
Always good to be here.